My husband announced at the rehearsal dinner she already agreed to pay for everything. I froze. I hadn't agreed to anything. His whole family started thanking me. I smiled and said, of course. Then I went home, made one phone call, and the next morning they all received a message that made them panic. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching, get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. Of course she will. The words left my husband's lips, smooth as the champagne he was raising, and for a moment the entire restaurant seemed to tilt. The crystal clinks died away. The soft murmur of the rehearsal dinner crowd faded into a dull roar in my ears. All eyes shifted from Robert's beaming face to mine. He stood at the head of the long table, one hand casually in his pocket, the other lifting his flute. I already told them you pay for the wedding, he announced, as if sharing the most delightful news. His smile was wide, confident, the same smile that had charmed me a decade ago. Now it felt like a physical shove. My own glass was in my hand. I felt the cold stem against my fingers, the slight condensation. I looked at the pale gold liquid inside. I had been enjoying its crisp, dry taste seconds before. Now it might as well have been vinegar. I became intensely aware of the weight of my silk dress, the delicate fabric suddenly feeling like a heavy, ornate costume. The low lighting from the overhead fixtures, meant to be romantic, now felt like interrogation lamps. To Victoria, Robert continued, his voice warm with performed gratitude. Our families rock. We knew we could count on you. He gestured expansively toward his niece, Chloe, who was clutching her fiancé's arm, her eyes wide with gleeful shock. This means Chloe can have the string quartet for the ceremony and the upgraded floral arches. No compromises. A beat of silence hung, thick and expectant. Then a wave of sound crashed over me. Chloe squealed. Her mother, my sister-in-law Linda, gasped, "Robert, you did," before turning to me with tearful eyes. "Vic, oh my God, are you serious? This is too much." Her tone held no question, only giddy acceptance. Chloe's father, Richard, clapped his hands together once. "Well, that solves the budget issue. Knew you were good people." He nodded at me, a transaction acknowledged. Every face at the table, a constellation of Robert's relatives, was alight with relief and celebration. They smiled at me, raising their glasses in a second, spontaneous toast. "To Vic!" someone chorused. The sound was like rushing water. I saw their mouths moving, their heads nodding in my direction. I registered the expressions, approval, gratitude, a hint of envy from a cousin. Not a single one of them saw the freeze in my spine, the lockdown of my muscles. They saw only what I presented. A successful woman, a dutiful aunt by marriage, a generous benefactor. I must discuss my face. In moments of extreme shock, I have learned my face does not fall. It settles. It arranges itself into a pleasant, neutral mask. Years of client meetings, of delivering difficult financial forecasts, of maintaining composure when internally I am recalculating entire life plans, have trained it well. So my lips curved. Not a full smile, but a soft, closed-mouth approximation of one. My eyebrows lifted slightly, a look of modest surprise. I gave a small, graceful dip of my chin. It was a performance of acquiescence. I knew it as I was doing it. The alternative, to let my jaw drop, to say, "What?" in a tone of pure disbelief, to stand up and contradict my husband in front of his entire family, was a path of immediate nuclear conflict. A scene. And I was not a woman who made scenes. Robert knew that. He had banked on that. He leaned down then as the chatter resumed and kissed my cheek. His lips were warm. His hand came to rest on the back of my silk-covered shoulder. "See," he whispered, his breath smelling of gin and tonic. "Easy, they're happy. You've made everyone's night." The hand on my shoulder felt like a brand, a claim staked. I took a sip of my champagne. It was bitter now. I swallowed it anyway. I looked at Chloe, who was already pulling out her phone, no doubt to message her planner about the quartet. "Thank you, Aunt Vic," she trilled, blowing me a kiss. The title Aunt always sounded faintly ridiculous coming from her, a woman in her 20s to whom I was no blood relation. It was a label of convenience, used when something was needed. "Of course," I heard myself say. The two words emerged clear and calm, a lifetime of manners propelling them out. "It's your special day." The phrase tasted like ash. The dinner continued. Plates were cleared. Dessert was served. I ate a few bites of flourless chocolate cake. I cannot recall its flavor. I participated in conversations. I answered when spoken to. I asked Chloe about her final dress fitting. I listened to Richard talk about the golf tournament he was playing in next weekend. All the while, a separate, silent process was booting up inside me, like a secure computer system initializing in a shielded room. It was a system of assessment. First assessment, the sum. A wedding of this scale with the venue they'd chosen, the guest list of 200, the lavish details Chloe had openly craved. I estimated a figure. It was substantial. It was not impossible for me, but it was a sum that represented things. A significant investment contribution for a client. A renovation to my own home office. A charitable donation that could actually affect change. It was not a sum one volunteers casually. Second assessment, the history. This was not the first time Robert had offered my resources as a peace offering to his family. There was the loan to his brother for a business venture that was never repaid, framed as a family investment. There were the consistently extravagant Christmas gifts I was expected to provide for everyone, while receiving modest trinkets in return. There was the vacation home we rarely used that was perpetually available for his relatives. Smaller things always presented as the easier path. It's just money, Vic. It keeps the peace. You know how they get. Third and most critical assessment, the action. He had not asked. He had not discussed. He had not even informed me privately. He had announced it publicly, cornering me with the force of collective expectation. He had turned my assumed compliance into a social contract in front of an audience. The humiliation was not in the price tag. It was in the absolute erasure of my consent. He had told them I would pay. Therefore, I would. I watched him for the rest of the evening. He was in his element, the magnanimous hero, the solver of problems. He laughed louder, clapped backs, enjoyed the reflected glow of my supposed generosity. He did not look at me with uncertainty or guilt. He looked at me with satisfaction, a job well done. When we finally stood to leave, the goodbyes were effusive. Linda hugged me tightly. "We'll have lunch next week to go over the details with the planner, okay? Since it's your gift, you should have input," she said, as if granting me a privilege. Richard shook my hand again, a firm, business-like grip. "We owe you one," he said, though history proved that debt would never be called. Chloe embraced me, her perfume overwhelming. "You're the best. Wait till you see the arches." In the cool night air of the parking lot, the silence began. It was not a peaceful silence. It was a dense, heavy thing that filled the luxurious interior of my car as I slid into the passenger seat. Robert started the engine, the soft purr a contrast to the noise still ringing in my head. He adjusted the climate control. He backed out of the space. He hummed a little, a tuneless sound of contentment. He drove for 5 full minutes before he spoke. "Well," he said, glancing at me, "that went smoothly, don't you think?" I looked out the window at the passing streetlights, each one a streak of gold in the dark. I felt the last of the performance drain from my body, leaving behind a cold, hard certainty. The seed of a plan, tiny and dark, had been planted in the ruined soil of that public moment. It would need time to take root. For now, I let the silence speak. I let him believe his peace had been purchased. He took my quiet for acceptance. It was the last mistake he would make. He took my quiet for acceptance. The car moved through the quiet suburban streets, each turn familiar. The houses we passed were large, well-kept, with manicured lawns glowing under strategic landscape lighting. This was the picture of attained peace. My own home, when we pulled into the driveway, was a part of that picture. A modern colonial, painted a soft gray with white trim. I had chosen the color myself. Robert turned off the engine. The sudden absence of the hum made the silence in the car absolute. He cleared his throat. "You're quiet," he said. It was an observation, not a question of concern. "I am thinking," I replied. My voice was even. It sounded foreign to my own ears. "About the wedding, don't worry. Linda will handle all the details. You just need to show up with the checkbook." He chuckled, a short, dismissive sound. He unbuckled his seatbelt and opened his door. I did not move immediately. I watched him walk to the front door, his silhouette confident under the porch light. He fumbled for his keys. I finally released my seatbelt and followed. Inside, the house was cool and still. I placed my purse on the console table in the foyer, aligning it parallel to the edge. I slipped off my heels and set them neatly on the shoe tray. These small, orderly actions grounded me. Robert was already in the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water from the dispenser in the refrigerator door. "I know it's a lot," he said, his back to me, "but it's for family." I walked into the kitchen but did not sit. I stood by the island, resting my fingertips on the cool quartz surface. "You did not ask me, Robert." He turned, leaning against the counter. He took a sip of water. "Ask you? Vic, come on, you know how they are. If I'd asked, you would have listed 10 practical reasons why it was a poor financial decision. There would have been a discussion, it would have been a whole thing." He gestured with his free hand, as if brushing away an irritating fly. "This way, it's done. No drama." "No drama for you," I corrected. My tone was flat. "You created drama for me and solved it with my money. That is not no drama. That is a transfer of burden." He set his glass down a little too hard. "There you go, that's exactly what I mean. Transfer of burden. It's not a business transaction, Vic. It's my niece's wedding. It's a gift. A gift is given voluntarily. It is not announced by a third party as a completed fact. I am your husband, not a third party." His voice took on an edge of frustration. "Since when do we nickel and dime my family? What's yours is mine, right? That's what marriage is." I looked at him. I really looked at him. The man I had shared a home with for 10 years. The man who found my financial acumen impressive when it benefited our shared goals, but inconvenient when it conflicted with his desire for an easy life. I saw the faint lines of irritation around his eyes. He genuinely could not comprehend my objection. In his mind, he had navigated a social obstacle course with grace, and I was refusing to hand him the trophy. "What's mine is not yours to pledge without consultation," I said. "That is a fundamental rule of partnership, of respect." "Respect?" He pushed off from the counter. "What about respect for me, for my position in my family? Do you think it's easy for me, always being the one whose wife has the means? They make comments, Vic, little jokes. This shuts them up. It makes me look good. It makes us look good." So there it was, the core of it. It was not about Chloe's happiness, not truly. It was about his ego. It was about purchasing social capital within his family using my currency. I felt a cold clarity wash over me, freezing the last flickers of hurt and heat. This was a pattern, not an anomaly. The loan to his brother had been about him playing the successful benefactor. The lavish gifts were about him demonstrating his good fortune. My resources were a prop in his personal theater. I did not argue further. Arguing with this logic was like trying to hold water in a sieve. It would all drain away, leaving nothing but the same empty container. My silence returned, but it was a different silence now. It was not shock. It was strategy. "Fine," he said, misreading my quiet once again. He ran a hand through his hair. "You're upset, I get it. You'll feel better in the morning. You'll see how happy it makes everyone." He walked over and gave my shoulder a perfunctory squeeze. "I'm going to bed. Don't stay up too late with your spreadsheets." He left the kitchen. I listened to his footsteps on the stairs, then the sound of our bedroom door closing. The house settled back into its quiet. I stood there for several minutes, my mind not racing but methodically scanning. I thought of the sum again. I thought of our finances. We kept separate accounts for personal spending and a joint account for household expenses. The joint account did not contain enough to cover a wedding. He knew that. So his announcement presumed the money would come from my personal accounts or from my investment funds. He had committed my separate assets. That was another line crossed. I did not go upstairs. I turned and walked down the hallway to the other side of the house, to my home office. I opened the door and flipped on the light. This room was my sanctuary. Everything here was mine. The dark walnut desk, clean and organized, the ergonomic chair, the framed certifications on the wall, the bookcases with volumes on tax law and economic theory. It was a space of logic and control. I sat down at the desk. The computer woke with a soft glow. I did not open any files yet. I simply sat in the stillness, my hands resting on the arms of the chair. I replayed the evening, the toast, the collective gaze, the pressure, the assumption. I examined the feeling not as a wound, but as data. The data indicated a systemic failure. The previous incidents, the loan, the gifts, the vacation home, were warnings I had ignored for the sake of harmony. I had treated them as isolated transactions, each one manageable on its own. I had paid the price of peace, as Robert called it, but tonight was not a transaction. It was an annexation. He had not negotiated for a piece of my territory. He had simply planted his flag and declared it his to give away. Peace had a price, it was true, but I was done paying it. The account was closed. A strange calm descended on me. The anger was still there, but it was no longer a hot, scrambling thing. It had been compressed into a dense, cold weight, a tool, a motivator. The seed that had been planted in the restaurant now put out its first, tough root, the decision to not comply. But non-compliance was not enough. Simple refusal would make me the villain, the stingy, selfish wife who broke a promise to a weeping bride. Robert would be the misunderstood peacemaker, his family the wronged victims. That was the narrative he had set up with his public announcement. To change the outcome, I would have to dismantle that narrative. I would need a plan that was not emotional but structural. A plan built on facts, not feelings. I looked at the blank computer screen. My reflection was a pale, serious ghost in the dark glass. I am a financial planner. My profession is built on assessing resources, understanding obligations, and executing strategies. It was time to apply my professional skill set to a personal problem. I did not start working that night. I did not open a spreadsheet or a document. I simply sat in the quiet of my office, in the heart of the beautiful home I had helped build, and I made the conscious, deliberate choice. The price of this particular piece was my self-respect. I found I was not willing to pay it. I turned off the light and sat in the dark for a long time, watching the moonlight trace a rectangle on the carpet. The battle lines were now drawn. They just didn't know it yet. The moonlight had shifted across the carpet before I finally moved. The decision was made. It was no longer a feeling, but a fact logged in my mind. Now came the first action step. I needed an ally, but more importantly, I needed a strategist who understood leverage. I picked up my phone from the desk. The screen glowed in the dark room, casting a pale light on my hands. It was late, but I knew she would be awake. Janet answered on the second ring. "Vic, everything okay?" Her voice was alert, free of sleep. I could picture her in her own home office, glasses perched on her nose, surrounded by case files. "No," I said. The word was simple and clean. "Robert announced at the rehearsal dinner tonight that I am paying for Chloe's entire wedding." There was a beat of silence on the other end, then a sharp, succinct exhalation. "He did what?" "He made a toast. He said, 'I already told them you pay for the wedding,' in front of everyone." "And what did you say?" Her tone was that of a lawyer taking a statement. "I said, of course. What else could I say in that moment?" "You could have said, 'My husband is mistaken,'" Janet stated flatly. "But I understand. Social pressure. Trapped." I heard the rustle of papers, the creak of a chair. She was shifting into work mode. "Okay, walk me through it, the exact wording he used." I repeated the scene for her, detailing the restaurant, the faces, Robert's justification in the car. I kept my voice detached, as if reporting on a client's poor financial decision. Janet listened without interruption. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. "He publicly volunteered your separate assets to cover a family obligation without your consent. That's audacious. Stupid, but audacious." His reasoning was that it was easier, that it makes him look good to his family. "Of course it does," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "He gets to be the hero with your treasury. Classic. So what's your move? You're not actually writing that check." It was not a question. Janet knew me. "No," I confirmed. "I am not, but a simple no makes me the villain. He has set the narrative. I need to change the narrative." "Correct. You need to shift the foundation out from under him, make his announcement meaningless." I could hear her tapping a pen. "The wedding is when? Next Saturday." "Yes." "And the final payments for vendors are due." Most were due last week, according to Chloe's frantic texts to the family group chat I ignore. The venue final payment is due tomorrow at noon. "The venue," Janet repeated, and I could almost see her sharp smile. "The big one, who signed the contract, do you know?" I straightened in my chair. This was the pivot. "I don't. I was never involved. Robert's brother Richard, Chloe's father, was handling it. Find out, get a copy. Contracts are everything, Vic. If your name isn't on it, you have no obligation to pay it. Robert's announcement is just hot air. It has no legal weight. But it has immense social weight, I countered. They all believe it now, expect it. Then you use the legal reality to dismantle the social expectation, she said, her logic ruthless and clear. You don't argue, you present facts. You didn't sign, you never agreed. The debt is not yours. Let them panic. Let them turn to Robert. The pressure should land on him where it belongs. A cold sense of focus sharpened within me. She was right. I had been thinking emotionally about the betrayal, the humiliation. Janet was thinking structurally about points of failure and applied pressure. My profession was about numbers and plans. Hers was about rules and consequences. Together, they formed a complete arsenal. So my first move is to obtain the venue contract, I said. Your first move is to confirm your financial position. Ensure no joint funds have been touched or are earmarked. Then, get that contract. If Richard signed as the host or guarantor, the venue will come after him, not you. Robert volunteered your money, but he can't volunteer your signature on a legally binding document. I felt a surge of clarity. The problem, which had felt like a suffocating fog, began to resolve into discrete, manageable components. Isolate the financials. Examine the contract. Determine the true obligated parties. He will say it's a technicality, I said. He will say I'm hiding behind legalities to get out of a family promise. And you will say that promises in business and in family should be built on mutual agreement, not public ambush. He used a social tactic. You are using a factual defense. Yours is stronger. We talked for another 20 minutes. She asked probing questions about my separate accounts, about any past precedent of Robert accessing them. There was none. I had always been careful about that boundary. She advised me on the tone to use when requesting the contract: polite, concerned, helpful. I want to ensure the payment is processed correctly. Could you forward me the agreement so I have the venue's banking details? Something benign. This isn't just about the money, is it? Janet asked finally, her voice softening a fraction. No, it is about the principle, the assumption. Good, don't lose sight of that. The money is just the battlefield. The war is for your autonomy. Don't fire the first shot in anger. Fire it with precision. I intend to. Call me tomorrow after you see the contract. And Vic. Yes. I'm proud of you for not just swallowing it this time. We ended the call. The room felt different. The quiet was no longer heavy with inaction. It was charged with potential. I opened my laptop. I did not search for the contract yet. It was too late to email Richard. Instead, I logged into my banking portal, both the joint account and my personal accounts. I scanned the transactions from the last month. Nothing related to wedding vendors. No large transfers. The joint account balance was as expected, covering our mortgage and utilities. My personal accounts were undisturbed. Robert had made a promise on my behalf, but he had no mechanism to force its fulfillment. He had assumed my compliance was a given. It was a critical error in judgment. I closed the banking tabs. I opened a new blank document. At the top, I typed Action Plan Asterisk. I listed the steps in order. 1. Obtain venue contract. 2. Review signatories and payment terms. 3. Assess full wedding budget estimate. 4. Draft communication. 5. Determine timing. The plan was skeletal, but it was a start. It was a conversion of emotion into procedure. My fury was no longer a storm inside me. It was a steady current powering a machine. I looked at the time. It was past 1 a.m. Upstairs, Robert was asleep, confident in his solved problem. He believed the matter was closed. He did not know that in the quiet of my office, the first gears of his reckoning had just begun to turn. The call to Janet was not an act of venting. It was a mobilization. I had enlisted my general. Now it was time to survey the field. The list on my screen was a comfort. A plan, however basic, is a form of control. I saved the document and closed my laptop. The house was silent. I went upstairs, moving past the closed bedroom door to the guest bathroom to brush my teeth and change into sleep clothes. When I slipped into bed, Robert was asleep on his side, his breathing deep and even. The space between us felt wider than the physical inches. I did not sleep immediately. My mind was reviewing the steps, anticipating obstacles. I fell into a shallow, restless doze a few hours before dawn. The morning routine was a study in normalcy. Robert was already in the kitchen when I came down, dressed for work, scrolling through news on his tablet. The smell of coffee filled the room. He glanced up. "Sleep okay?" he asked. His tone was casual, testing the waters. "Well enough," I said, pouring my own coffee. I added a precise amount of cream. "Did Linda mention when she wanted to meet about the wedding details?" He looked relieved at my question, interpreting it as engagement. "Sometime this week, I think. She'll call you. See, it'll be fine." He gave me a smile, the same charming one from the night before. It had lost its power. He left for work with a peck on my cheek. I stood in the foyer, listening to his car pull away. Then I returned to my office. The day was mine. I had cleared my client's schedule weeks ago, anticipating this week would involve some family obligations. The irony was not lost on me. I began with the finances again, performing a deeper audit. I printed 3 months of statements for both the joint account and my personal savings and investment accounts. I spread the pages on my desk. With a yellow highlighter, I marked every transaction that was solely for my benefit, for Robert's benefit, and for shared household expenses. The pattern was clear. The household account was proportionate to our shared life. My personal accounts were just that, personal. There were no unexplained holds, no large pending transfers. Robert had not attempted to access anything. His confidence was breathtaking. He truly believed his announcement was the same as my authorization. Satisfied with the financial isolation, I moved to the next step, the contract. I started with email. I searched for keywords. Chloe wedding, venue, Maple Grove Estates, the location I recalled from Save the Dates. I found a thread from months ago sent to a family group list I was included on. It contained a PDF attachment. MG Estates Wedding Agreement, C. Miller and J. Owens. I opened it. The document was 12 pages long. I scrolled past the boilerplate language about capacity, liability, and cancellation policies. I went directly to the signature page at the end. My eyes scanned the lines. Client signature bridegroom, signed by Chloe and her fiancé, Jacob. Client signature host guarantor. A signature here. I read the printed name beneath it, Richard Miller *, Chloe's father. His personal email and phone number were listed as contacts. His home address was given as the billing address. There was no other signature line, no co-guarantor, no mention of Victoria Lawson or Robert Lawson anywhere in the document. I read it again, carefully. The final payment clause stated the remaining balance was due from the host guarantor 72 hours prior to the event. That was today. A cold, sharp feeling of clarity settled in my chest. This was the leverage Janet had predicted. Richard Miller, Robert's brother, was legally responsible for the venue's final payment of $28,000. Not me. Robert's public promise was a social fiction. This signature was legal fact. I leaned back in my chair. The document glowed on my screen. This changed everything. A direct refusal would have been a personal conflict. But this allowed for a simple statement of fact. I was not reneging on a promise. I was pointing out that the promise was built on a false premise. I printed a copy of the signature page. The black ink of Richard's signature was a tangible artifact of the true obligation. I held the paper in my hands. This was my weapon, not a shout, but a document. My mind began to work through the implications. Richard likely assumed I would be transferring the funds to him or directly to the venue. He had probably already assured the venue coordinator that the payment was coming. Today, the pressure was on him, but he believed it was safely deflected onto me. I needed to correct that belief, and I needed to do it in a way that was irrevocable and clear. A private call could be argued, manipulated, or begged against. A text message could be ignored or misunderstood. This required formality. It needed to be written, and it needed to be seen by all relevant parties to prevent any he said, she said. I opened a new email draft. I addressed it to Robert, carbon copying Richard, Linda, and Chloe. I kept the subject line neutral. Ray, wedding venue. I began typing. Dear all asterisk. Following up on last night's conversation. Robert, you mentioned my covering the wedding costs. To ensure clarity and proper handling, I've reviewed the relevant documents. I have located the venue contract for Maple Grove Estates. I note that the listed host guarantor is Richard Miller, and the final payment is due today. For any formal financial commitment, I would need to be a signatory on the agreement. As I am not legally able to issue payment directly to the venue for this contract. The financial responsibility, as per the executed document, remains with the signatory, Richard. I am, of course, happy to discuss gift options for Chloe and Jacob separately. Best, Victoria. I read it over. It was polite. It was professional. It was brutal in its precision. It did not say I wouldn't pay. It said I couldn't pay according to the rules they themselves had set up with their contract. It reframed Robert's grand gesture as a logistical impossibility. It transferred the looming crisis from my shoulders back to its point of origin, Richard's signed promise. But I did not hit send. Sending it now in the bright light of the business day would trigger immediate phone calls, eruptions, demands to see me. It would start a battle I was prepared for, but perhaps the timing could be more strategic. The final payment was due today, but venues often had a close of business cutoff. If the panic hit later in the day, their options to resolve it would be fewer. The pressure would be more acute. I saved the email as a draft. I opened my calendar. The final payment deadline was noon, as I recalled. I would send it at 11:45 a.m. The plan was no longer skeletal. It had a spine, and now it had a nervous system. The contract was the bone. The email would be the nerve strike. I had until 11:45 to ensure every word was perfect, every implication clear. I forwarded the contract PDF to Janet with a brief note. Leverage confirmed. Launch at 11:45. Her reply came minutes later. Clean, surgical, stand firm. I placed the printed signature page in the center of my desk. It was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a declaration of independence, written in someone else's hand. All I had to do was reveal it. The drafted email sat on my screen, a block of precise text in a calm sea of white. I had saved it, but not sent it. The digital clock in the corner read 10:17 a.m. I had 1 hour and 28 minutes before my chosen launch time. I used that time to verify everything. I reread the venue contract 3 more times, ensuring I had not missed an addendum, a co-signer line, anything. I confirmed the payment deadline by cross-referencing the contract with an earlier email from the venue coordinator to Richard. The final balance of $28,500 was indeed due today by noon, via wire transfer or certified check. I reviewed my own email for tone. It was unassailable. It stated facts, not feelings. It shifted the problem without creating new ones. At 11:30, I made a cup of tea. I carried it to my office and set it on the coaster to the left of my mouse bed. I sat down. I opened the draft. I checked the recipient list one final time. Robert, Richard, Linda, Chloe, all correct. I did not add the wider family. This was a targeted communication, not a public broadcast. The news would spread quickly enough from these 4. At 11:44, my hand was steady. There was no tremor of doubt, no last-minute pang of guilt. What I felt was a clarity so sharp it was almost physical. This was not an act of spite. It was an act of correction. Robert had created a false reality. I was simply restoring the true one. 11:45. I moved the cursor over the send button. I clicked. There was a soft digital whoosh, a brief animation of the email disappearing from my outbox. A notification appeared. Message sent. That was all. No fanfare. No dramatic music. Just a change in status from draft to sent in the unseen pathways of the internet. I leaned back. I took a sip of my tea. It was still hot. The house was quiet. Outside my window, a bird landed on a branch. The ordinary world continued. I knew what was happening in the digital space I had just invaded. The notification would have appeared on Robert's phone at work. It would have chimed on Richard's laptop. Linda and Chloe, likely together fussing over last-minute details, would see it flash on their screens. There would be a moment of confusion, then the reading, then the comprehension. I had turned off notifications for the family group chat weeks ago, but I opened it now on my phone. I set the phone face up on the desk beside me. I did not touch it. I simply waited for it to light up. It took 90 seconds. The first bubble appeared. It was from Linda. A single word, Vic. Then another from Chloe. What does this mean? The payment is due today. Then a call. Robert's name flashed on my screen. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. He called again immediately. I sent that call to voicemail as well. This was not a conversation for the phone. He needed to sit with the email to read it again, to understand that his solution had just evaporated. My phone began to vibrate with a rapid series of text notifications, shaking against the wood of the desk. Robert, call me right now. Robert, Victoria, this isn't funny. Robert, they're freaking out. You need to call Richard and fix this. Richard's contact appeared for an incoming call. I let it go. Richard, Vic, got your email. There must be a misunderstanding. We talked about this last night. Robert assured us. Linda, Victoria, please call me. Chloe is hysterical. The venue coordinator just called Richard asking where the wire is. The phone continued to buzz, a persistent, angry insect on the desk. I watched the screen light up with each new message, each missed call. I did not feel anxiety. I felt a detached, observational interest. This was the predicted reaction. The panic was not my panic. It was theirs. It was the natural consequence of a plan built on a faulty assumption. I turned the phone over so the screen faced the desk. The muffled buzzing continued. I finished my tea. I opened a new browser tab and looked at my investment portfolio. I reviewed the performance of a few stocks. I noted one that had dipped slightly and made a note to research it later. The mundane task was a deliberate anchor. My world was not ending. My financial security was intact. My name was not on that contract. After 20 minutes, the buzzing slowed, then stopped. The silence felt different now. It was a waiting silence, charged with the energy of their scrambling. They would be on the phone with each other, voices loud, talking over one another. They would be trying to reach Robert, demanding he control his wife. Robert would be realizing that he could not. I knew the next phase would be in person. Robert would leave work. He would come here. That confrontation was inevitable, and I needed to be ready for it. I was not afraid of it. In fact, I welcomed it. The email had been my opening statement. The face-to-face meeting would be the first cross-examination. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I made a sandwich. I ate it slowly, tasting each bite. I cleaned the kitchen afterward, wiping the counters until they shone. Order in my environment helped maintain order in my mind. As I was drying my hands, I heard the familiar sound of Robert's car pulling into the driveway, faster than usual. The engine cut off. A car door slammed. I placed the folded dish towel neatly on the counter. I walked to the living room and sat in my preferred armchair, the one that faced the entrance from the foyer. I picked up a book I had been reading, a dry history of economic theory, and opened it to a random page. I did not read the words. I used the book as a prop, a symbol of calm. The front door opened. Heavy footsteps crossed the foyer. Robert appeared in the archway to the living room. His face was flushed. His tie was loosened. He held his phone in his hand like a weapon. "What?" he said, his voice low and strained. "Did you do?" He stood in the archway, his phone clenched in his hand. "What?" he repeated, each word sharp. "Did you do?" I closed my book, marking my place with a finger. "I clarified a misunderstanding," I said. My voice was calm. "As per my email." "Clarified?" He took 2 steps into the room. "You lit a bomb. Richard is having chest pains. Chloe is sobbing so hard she can't breathe. Linda is screaming at me that I've ruined her daughter's wedding. You call that clarification?" I stated a fact. Richard signed the venue contract. I did not. The financial obligation is his. Your announcement last night did not alter that legal document. He stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. "Legal document? This isn't a courtroom, Vic. This is family, you promised. I did not promise. You did. You promised on my behalf without my knowledge. That does not constitute a promise from me. It constitutes an assumption from you. His face contorted with frustration. He looked at his phone as it buzzed again. They're blowing up my phone. You have to call them. You have to tell them it was a mistake, that the wire is coming. The wire is not coming from my accounts, I stated. That is not a mistake. It is a decision. You can't do this. His voice rose. You can't humiliate me like this in front of my family. You humiliated yourself, I corrected. You made a promise you had no authority to make. I am simply revealing the truth of the situation. The humiliation you feel is the consequence of your own action. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He seemed to be searching for a lever, for the right words to make me capitulate as I always had before. He found none. The cold, factual ground I stood on offered no purchase for his emotional arguments. My own phone, still face down on the desk in my office, began to buzz again. The sound was distant but distinct. Then the doorbell rang. We both froze. Robert's eyes widened. They're here. I assumed they might be, I said and stood up. I placed the book neatly on the side table. He grabbed my arm as I passed him. His grip was tight. Don't answer it. Let me talk to them first. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. I did not pull away. I simply held his gaze until his fingers loosened and fell away. They are not here to see you, I said. They are here to see the person they believe promised them $28,000. That is me, according to you. I walked to the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see two blurred shapes. I opened it. Linda and Chloe stood on the doorstep. Linda's face was blotchy and tear-stained. Chloe's eyes were red-rimmed and wild with panic. They both looked past me immediately, spotting Robert in the foyer behind me. Robert, Linda wailed, pushing past me without a greeting. Fix this, you said it was handled. Chloe followed, her voice a high-pitched shriek. The venue said they'll release our date if the wire isn't received by 2 p.m. My wedding is in 5 days. What did she do? She pointed a trembling finger at me. I closed the door quietly and turned to face them. Linda was clutching Robert's sleeve. Chloe stood with her arms wrapped around herself, rocking slightly. Victoria, Linda said, turning to me, her tone switching to a strained attempt at reason. Sweetheart, there's been a mix-up. Robert told us last night. We all heard it. The family is counting on you. The mix-up, I said, was Robert's statement. I am sorry you were given incorrect information. Incorrect, Chloe cried. He said you were paying. Everyone heard. You didn't say no. I did not have an opportunity to say no. The announcement was presented as a finished decision. My silence in that moment was not consent. It was shock. Robert found his voice. See, this is what she's been doing, hiding behind technicalities. It's a family gift, Vic. Just do the right thing. My phone began to buzz from the office again, insistently. Then Robert's phone rang. Then Linda's. The symphony of panic was overwhelming the room. Who is that? Linda asked, fumbling in her purse. Probably your husband, I said. Or the venue, or the florist wondering about their final payment. The chain reaction has started. The person they will all call is the signatory on the contracts. That is Richard. Chloe's phone pinged with a text. She looked at it and let out a small wail. It's the photographer. She says if the balance isn't paid by end of day, she's canceling. She thrust the phone toward me as if I could change the words on the screen. You have to pay her. I am not a party to any of these agreements, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. I have not signed anything. I have not agreed to anything. The financial commitments for this wedding were made by you, your fiancé, and your parents. My husband's speech did not magically transfer those legal responsibilities to me. The room went quiet for a moment, save for the persistent buzzing of phones. They were all looking at me, Linda with dawning horror, Chloe with furious disbelief, Robert with impotent rage. I had stripped the situation bare. There were no more social niceties to hide behind, no more assumptions of familial duty. There was only the cold architecture of contracts and commitments, and I was not in the blueprint. "So what are you saying?" Linda whispered. "You're just letting it all fall apart." "I am saying the structure was built without my support. It is not my job to shore it up now that it is collapsing. My role here was invented, without my knowledge, to solve a problem I did not create." Chloe sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, burying her face in her hands. "My wedding," she sobbed. "It's ruined." Robert stepped toward me, his voice low and dangerous. "You are my wife. You will fix this. You will call the venue and give them your banking information. Today." I met his gaze. "I will not." The finality of the statement hung in the air. It was a wall. He could rage against it, but it would not move. Linda's phone rang again. She looked at the screen, her face pale. "It's the caterer." She answered it, turning away, her voice a desperate murmur. "Yes, hello, I know, I'm so sorry, we're working on it." The chaos was no longer an abstract concept. It was in my foyer. It was the sound of a dream unraveling in real time. And I stood at the center of it, perfectly still, the only calm point in the storm. I had not caused the storm. I had merely stopped providing shelter from it. The rain was now falling exactly where it always should have. Chloe's sobs and Linda's frantic phone call formed a discordant background hum in the foyer. Robert stood before me, his earlier rage solidifying into something colder, harder. He looked from the weeping women back to me, his jaw tight. "Linda," he said, his voice cutting through her murmured pleas to the caterer. "Take Chloe into the living room. Give me 5 minutes with my wife. Alone." Linda hesitated, but the command in his tone was familiar to her. She nodded, pulling a limp Chloe up from the stairs and guiding her down the hallway. The sound of Chloe's crying faded slightly as the living room door closed behind them. We were alone in the foyer. The silence between us was dense, charged. "You will undo this," Robert said. It was no longer a demand, but a statement of what he believed to be inevitable. "There is nothing to undo. I have done nothing but state a fact. You are the one who needs to undo your announcement. You cannot." "This is about more than the money," he said, stepping closer. "This is about respect. You are disrespecting me. You are making me a liar in front of my family." "You made yourself a liar," I replied. "You told them something that was not true. I am correcting the record. That is not disrespect. That is accuracy." He shook his head, a quick, frustrated motion. "You're twisting it. You're using your lawyer brain to win an argument against your own husband. Since when is our marriage a courtroom? Since you decided to hold a public referendum on my finances without my presence on the ballot. You chose this framework, Robert. Not me. You created a contractual obligation in the social sphere. I am simply pointing out that the legal sphere, the one that actually moves money, does not recognize it." He stared at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something beyond anger in his eyes. It was confusion, shaded with the beginning of fear. His tactics were not working. Charm had failed. Bullying was failing. The solid ground of my past compliance had vanished beneath his feet. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice lowering. "An apology. Fine, I'm sorry. I should have talked to you first. Is that what you need to hear?" "An apology is an acknowledgement of a wrong," I said. "It does not erase the consequence of the wrong. The consequence is that your brother's family is now facing a financial crisis of their own making, one you falsely assured them was solved. My apology does not pay their vendors." His hands clenched at his sides. "So you want to punish them? You want to watch them scramble, to see Chloe's wedding fall apart? That's cruel, Victoria. That's not you." "You mistake cause for effect," I said, my tone level. "I am not causing the scramble. Your lie is causing the scramble. My inaction is merely allowing the natural consequences of that lie to proceed. There is a difference. I did not create this situation. I am refusing to absorb its cost." He paced 2 steps away, then turned back. "What about us? What does this do to us? You're choosing this principle over our marriage. You made that choice when you chose to sacrifice my autonomy for your social capital. You prioritized your standing with your family over the basic respect owed to your wife. You forced me into a position where I must choose between my self-respect and your comfort. I am choosing my self-respect." The words landed in the quiet space between us. He flinched as if struck. The language of the conflict had shifted entirely onto my terms. It was no longer about a wedding or money. It was about autonomy and respect. "You're blowing up our life over a mistake," he whispered, but the conviction was gone from his voice. "A pattern of mistakes," I corrected. "The loan to your brother, the constant expectation of extravagant gifts, the use of the vacation home, each one a small withdrawal from my account of goodwill. Last night, you tried to make a withdrawal that would have bankrupted it. The account is closed." From the living room, we heard a fresh wave of sobbing, followed by Linda's raised, pleading voice. The pressure outside the door was building. Robert looked toward the sound, and I saw the full weight of his miscalculations settle on him. He had promised a solution. He had delivered only a bigger problem, and the person he had always counted on to clean up his messes was refusing to lift a finger. "They're not going to leave," he said, almost to himself. "They're going to stay here until this is fixed." "Then they will be very uncomfortable guests," I said. "I am going to my office. I have work to do. You may entertain your family." I began to walk past him. He didn't try to stop me this time. He just stood there, watching me go, his earlier fury replaced by a hollowed-out look of disbelief. I entered my office and closed the door. The muted sounds of distress were still audible, but they were distant now. I sat at my desk. I did not open my laptop. I listened. I heard Robert's footsteps move to the living room. I heard the door open, the voices rise in a tangled wave of questions and accusations. His voice, trying to regain authority, saying, "Let's all just calm down. We'll figure this out." But there was no we anymore. There was them, and there was me. And I held the only thing they wanted, access to resources I had no obligation to give. The power dynamic, which he had always assumed was in his favor due to family loyalty and social pressure, had inverted. The power now sat with the person who controlled the money and, more importantly, who understood the rules governing it. The confrontation was over. I had stated my position. He had exhausted his appeals. He was now in the unenviable position of having to explain to his family that the lifeline he had thrown them was an illusion. The reckoning he faced was no longer with me. It was with the reality he had tried to circumvent. My part was done until they decided to approach the problem from a new angle. I was prepared to wait. I sat at my desk for an hour. The sounds from the living room evolved. The initial sobbing and yelling subsided into a lower, more sustained murmur of tense conversation. I heard Robert's voice, steady but strained, and the sharper tones of Linda and Chloe. The phone calls continued, but less frequently. They were moving from panic to strategy. I waited. A soft knock came at my office door. It was not Robert's forceful rap. "Come in," I said. The door opened. It was Linda alone. Her eyes were puffy, but she had composed herself. She offered a thin, fragile smile. "Victoria, may I speak with you?" "Of course," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. She entered, closing the door gently behind her. She sat, folding her hands in her lap. She looked around the room at the bookshelves, the certificates, the tidy desk. It was not a space she visited often. We've been talking," she began. "Richard is on his way. He's spoken to the venue. They've given a 2-hour extension, but that's it." I nodded, waiting. "This has gotten out of hand," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It was a misunderstanding, a big, horrible misunderstanding. We all just want what's best for Chloe." "I understand that," I said. "My position remains unchanged. I am not a signatory on any agreement. I cannot legally fulfill a financial obligation that is not mine." "But you could asterisk," she pressed, leaning forward. "You have the means. You could just give Richard the money or pay the vendors directly. As a gift. Not because of any contract, but because you can, because we're family." I considered her for a moment. This was the new approach. Appeal to generosity, to family bonds, bypassing the argument of obligation entirely. "A gift of that magnitude is not given lightly," I said. "It is planned for, discussed. It is not extracted under duress following a public miscalculation. Her composure cracked. So you're going to let her wedding be a disaster, over principle. I am allowing the consequences of pre-existing financial commitments to unfold. My involvement is a separate question. Then get involved, she pleaded, her hands fluttering. Please, name your terms. What do you want? This was the opening. They had moved from demanding to negotiating. The power had shifted. Send Richard in when he arrives, I said. We will discuss it as a group. You, Richard, and myself. Robert may join, but he is not a decision-maker in this matter. Her eyes widened at the exclusion of her brother, but she nodded quickly. Okay, we'll do that. She stood, relief and anxiety warring on her face. She had secured a meeting, which was more than they had 10 minutes ago. Richard arrived 20 minutes later. He looked weary, his face drawn. The confident bluster from the rehearsal dinner was gone, replaced by the pallor of a man facing a sudden, large debt. They all filed into my office, Linda, Richard, Chloe, and Robert, who hovered near the door. My office was not designed for 5 people. It emphasized that this was my territory. I remained seated behind my desk. Please sit, I said to Richard and Linda. Chloe remained standing, arms crossed, glaring at me. Robert leaned against the wall. Richard cleared his throat. Vic, look, this is a mess. I'm sorry you were put on the spot. Robert shouldn't have said what he did without talking to you. It was a carefully crafted opening, assigning blame to Robert while appealing to me for a solution. I acknowledged it with a slight tilt of my head. However, he continued, the fact remains that the money is due now. My liquidity is tied up. If we don't make this payment, the wedding doesn't happen. Chloe is devastated. We're asking you as family for help. I laced my fingers together on the desk. I am willing to discuss providing financial assistance, I said. The room seemed to exhale. But it would not be a gift. It would be a loan, with terms. Richard's shoulders stiffened. A loan. A legally binding private loan. The principal would be the total outstanding amount required to satisfy all wedding vendors, as of today. We would establish a fair market interest rate. We would draft a repayment schedule, with monthly installments to begin 60 days after the wedding date. The loan would be co-signed by you and Linda. All of this would be documented in a contract drafted by my attorney. The room was silent. Chloe's mouth hung open. Robert pushed off the wall. A contract with interest? Vic, that's insulting. I turned my gaze to him. It is business. You attempted to make my finances your family's business. I am agreeing under strict and formal conditions. This is the cost of my involvement. We're not a bank, Linda cried. No, you are not, I agreed. I am also not a charitable foundation for last-minute wedding bailouts. If you require a substantial sum of money from me, these are the terms. They are non-negotiable. Richard studied me. He was a businessman. He understood contracts, interest, liability. He also understood he had no better option. What's the interest rate? He asked, his voice flat. I will have my attorney determine a standard rate for a private, unsecured loan, likely 4%. And the total principal. We would need a full list of outstanding balances from every vendor. I estimate between $40,000 and $45,000. We will use the exact figure. Chloe made a small, choked sound. 45,000? You want them to pay you back $45,000? I am offering to spend $45,000 of my money to fund your wedding, I clarified. The expectation of repayment is reasonable. You expected to have this wedding without that debt. That was an error. This is the correction. Richard looked at Linda, then at Chloe's stricken face. He was calculating. The humiliation of signing a loan with his sister-in-law versus the humiliation of canceling his daughter's wedding. The financial strain versus the social catastrophe. We need to see the contract, he said finally. Of course, my attorney will draw it up. Upon signing, I will issue immediate payments to all vendors. The wedding will proceed as planned. And if we don't sign, Linda whispered, then you will need to find another solution before the vendors cancel. That is not my concern. The ultimatum was clear. They had come to talk sense into me. Instead, I had presented them with a business proposition. There was no warmth in it, no familial grace. It was a cold, clean transaction to replace the messy, false promise. Richard gave a single, curt nod. Draw up the contract. Dad, Chloe wailed. Quiet, Chloe, he said, not looking at her. His eyes were on me. Send it over, we'll sign. I will need both your signatures, and Linda's, notarized. The funds will be released upon receipt. Fine. I stood up, signaling the meeting was over. Janet will be in touch later today with the documents. Goodbye. They filed out, a defeated procession. Robert was the last to leave. He paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I could not fully read. It was not anger anymore. It was something closer to awe and fear. I sat back down. The room was quiet again. I had not won. I had simply established the true cost of things. They could now choose to pay it or not. The power was no longer in the asking, but in the terms of the answer. I had moved from being a resource to be tapped to a lender setting conditions. It was a profound and satisfying shift. The loan documents were signed and notarized by the end of that day. Janet handled the process with efficient detachment. The total principal was $42,700. I authorized the wire transfers to the venue and the other major vendors from my savings account. The money moved from my possession into the ecosystem of Chloe's wedding. It was no longer a gift. It was a debt with a 4% annual interest rate and a 5-year repayment schedule. The wedding day was bright and clear. I dressed in a simple navy sheath dress, appropriate for a late afternoon ceremony. Robert left the house 2 hours before me, saying he had to help with last-minute arrangements for the groom's side. We did not discuss it. We had barely spoken since the contract was signed. A cold, formal silence had taken up residence in our home. I arrived at Maple Grove Estates alone. The valet took my car. The venue was, as promised, lovely, but the lavish excess Chloe had dreamed of was absent. The upgraded floral arches were single, modest arrangements of seasonal flowers at the entrance to the garden. The string quartet was a trio. The champagne fountain I had heard mentioned was a simple bar service. The adjustments were subtle, but to anyone who knew the original plans, they were glaring. The wedding had been scaled back to its contractual necessities, funded by a loan, not a windfall. I walked through the garden toward the seated guests. I saw Linda first. She was wearing a pale pink mother-of-the-bride dress, but her smile was tight, strained. She saw me and gave a small, stiff nod before turning quickly to speak to an aunt. Richard stood nearby, shaking hands with guests. His back was rigid. When his eyes met mine, he looked away immediately. The shame of the loan was a palpable aura around them. I found my seat on the aisle, in the row reserved for immediate family. Robert was already there. He wore his gray suit, but he looked uncomfortable in it. He did not stand when I approached. I sat down beside him, leaving a careful space between us. "You came," he said, not looking at me. "I RSVP'd yes," I replied. "I keep my commitments." He flinched at the word. We did not speak again. The guests filtered in. I felt their eyes on me. Whispers rustled through the rows like dry leaves. I kept my gaze forward, my posture relaxed. I was neither smiling nor frowning. I was present. That was all. The music shifted, signaling the start of the ceremony. The wedding party processed. Chloe appeared at the end of the garden path on her father's arm. Her dress was elaborate, a cloud of white tulle and lace. It was the one extravagance they had likely locked in before the financial crisis hit. Her face, however, was not radiant. It was set in a tense, determined expression. She looked like a soldier marching into a battle she knew she might lose. She did not glance at me as she passed. The ceremony was standard. Vows were exchanged. Rings were given. It was perfectly adequate. There were no doves released, no special musical performances. It was a wedding, not a production. When the officiant pronounced them married, the gathered family applauded. The sound was relieved, more than joyous. The crisis had been averted, but the cost was known, and it hung over the gathering like a thin mist. After the ceremony, the guests moved to the reception hall for cocktails. I stood with the crowd but did not join any conversation. Robert drifted toward his brothers. I saw Chloe and her new husband surrounded by a cluster of friends. She was laughing now, the tension easing with the ceremony complete and the party beginning. She caught my eye across the room. Her smile did not falter, but it did not reach her eyes either. She gave me the briefest of nods before turning her back. I circulated for a short time. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a waiter. I exchanged polite, minimal greetings with a few relatives who dared to approach me. "Lovely ceremony," they would say. "Yes, it was," I would agree. Nothing more was offered or expected. I did not stay for dinner. Once the wedding party had been introduced and had taken their seats at the head table, I saw that the event would proceed on its new, smaller scale. My role was finished. I had funded it. I had attended it. There was no reason to remain. I found Robert near the bar, nursing a drink. "I'm leaving," I told him. He looked at me, surprised. "Now, dinner hasn't been served." "I've seen what I came to see. I'll see you at home." "People will talk," he said, his voice low. "Let them," I replied. "They are already talking." I turned and walked out of the reception hall. I did not say goodbye to Linda or Richard or Chloe. My departure was quiet, unnoticed by most. The valet brought my car. As I drove away from Maple Grove Estates, the late afternoon sun glinting off its stone facade, I felt a deep, solid sense of closure. The wedding had happened. It was not the wedding of Chloe's fantasies, funded by my silent, grateful largesse. It was a wedding made possible by a loan, a business transaction that underscored the value of the money and the folly of the assumption that had nearly sunk it. The family was chastened. Robert was isolated. I had drawn a line so bright and clear that no one would ever dare cross it again. I drove home to the quiet house. I changed out of my dress. I made a cup of tea. I sat in my living room as the sun set. There was no triumph in the moment, only a profound and peaceful stillness. The external plot had resolved. The wedding had happened, but not as originally demanded. The balance of power had been permanently altered. That was enough. The quiet in the house after the wedding was not an empty quiet. It was a settled one. Weeks passed. The first of the month arrived, and an automated transfer of $786.54 moved from Richard and Linda's joint account into mine. It was the first installment on the loan, principal, and interest. I watched the notification appear on my phone. I felt nothing but a mild sense of procedural correctness. Robert and I began marital counseling. It was my condition for remaining in the house while we decided what came next. The therapist's office was a neutral, beige room. We sat in separate chairs. The therapist, Dr. Evans, asked Robert to explain why we were there. He spoke about the wedding, about my overreaction, about feeling betrayed by my lack of family loyalty. His language was still framed in the old narrative, where he was the misunderstood peacemaker. When it was my turn, I used different words. I spoke about consent, about autonomy, about the cumulative weight of disregarded boundaries. I cited the loan to his brother, the gifts, the vacation home. I presented it as a case study in eroded trust. Dr. Evans listened, her head tilted. I saw her making notes when I spoke. Robert grew frustrated in these sessions. He was not used to having his perspective challenged with such calm, factual precision. He could not refute the examples. He could only repeat that it was different with family. One session, Dr. Evans asked him, "Robert, when you announced Victoria would pay for the wedding, what was your thought process? Did you consider how she might feel?" He was silent for a long moment. "I thought she'd be annoyed, but she'd get over it. It was for a good cause. It was easier than saying no." "Easier for whom?" Dr. Evans asked. He did not have an answer. That was the beginning of a shift, not a reconciliation, but an understanding. He began to see the pattern, not as minor annoyances, but as a fundamental disrespect. I did not know if it was enough. I was not sure I needed it to be. My life outside that therapy room continued with a new focus. I spent more time in my office, but not on contingency plans or defense strategies. I worked on my own portfolio. I researched new investment opportunities. I opened a new, high-yield account specifically for the wedding loan repayments. The interest they paid me would be reinvested, compounding for my future alone. Janet called. "Dinner," she said. My treat to celebrate your newfound spine. We met at a small Italian restaurant we both liked, away from the usual suburban haunts. She was already at the table, a bottle of red wine open. She poured me a glass as I sat down. "To the victorious Victoria," she said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers. "To Leverage." We ordered. Over salad, she asked, "So, how's the domestic ceasefire?" "We are in a state of diplomatic negotiation," I said. "With professional mediation. The terms of the new treaty are still being discussed." She grinned. "I love it when you talk like a UN ambassador. And the loan?" "The first payment cleared. It was on time. I expect they will be punctual. The shame of defaulting would be greater than the burden of repayment." "Good, and you? How are you?" I considered the question. I took a sip of wine. "I am at peace. I am no longer financing anyone's peace but my own. It is a lighter way to live." "I'm proud of you," she said, her tone serious now. "It's hard to redraw lines with people who are used to coloring outside them." "It was necessary," I said. "That made it simple, not easy." We ate our pasta. We talked about her work, about a potential vacation I was considering, about nothing of consequence. It was a normal dinner between friends. That normalcy felt like the greatest victory of all. After dinner, I drove home. Robert was in the living room, watching a documentary. He muted it when I walked in. "How was Janet?" he asked. "It was fine," I said, hanging my coat in the closet. He paused. "Dr. Evans gave me some reading about boundaries." I nodded. "That's good." "I'm trying to understand it," he said. The defensiveness was gone from his voice, replaced by a tentative, weary honesty. "I know you are," I said. It was not forgiveness, but an acknowledgement of effort. It was all I could offer at that moment. I went upstairs to my office, my room now more than ever. I checked my email. There was a notification from my investment platform. The reinvestment of the first loan payment had already generated a small amount of dividend income. I smiled. It was a tiny thing, a few dollars, but it was mine, earned from the restoration of my own principles. I looked around the room, at the ordered shelves, the clean desk, the window looking out onto the dark garden. I thought of the rehearsal dinner, of the roar of blood in my ears, of the feeling of being erased. That woman had been shocked into silence. This woman, sitting here now, would never be silent again. The revenge was not in the loan, or the humbled wedding, or the strained family dinners. The revenge was in this quiet, in this unshakable calm, in the bank account growing steadily from the repayments of a lesson learned. I had reclaimed my territory, not with a shout, but with the meticulous application of rules they themselves had forgotten to value. I turned off my computer. The screen went dark, reflecting my own composed face back at me. The story was over. My life on my own terms was just beginning.